So today we're with Mr. Saul Isaksson, and we're going to have a pretty exciting conversation about football and the field of fitness and how they relate to one another as it pertains to the professional football players. It's a congruence of disciplines that I think is really interesting, yet it feels like virgin territory in a lot of ways. So before we dive into the topic, I think it's important our listeners and our viewers get to know you a little bit. Would you mind sharing something about your journey in football coaching? And how did you get into the technical side of coaching and working with Premier League players?
So I've been coaching for 22 years now.
Wow.
Started my career in America after university. I was captain of the university team. Just went to America after, didn't know what to do after university, and then never really took it seriously as a career. Came back to London and got a job at Tottenham in the what was called the foundation. Worked my way up into the academy quite quickly, and then worked there 6 years. Spent 4.5 years at Chelsea.
Oh wow!
All of this time, I'd come back from America where I'd been doing private training, one-on-one training, and then started up like a business here as well in England. So I was sort of like an individual specialist, skill specialist. Why was I a skill specialist? I mean, reflected really about my growing up in inner city London as a street player, if you like. That was my sort of background, but also the sort of players I like to watch as well. I had a real sort of obsession and passion for skillful type players, number 10s or whatever, those sorts of players. So it made sense to me to coach that way. And then I've sort of found my niche in that as well. And then that got me elevated quite quickly within Tottenham in the academy, and so I don't know if I decided to focus. I just focused on that. That's what I was going to do anyway. So really carving that niche in that industry, and then obviously working individually with players, and then started working with a few pros, and that built up, and the reputation built and stuff like that. And then now obviously I work as a consultant as well for like clubs with Arsenal, doing some stuff at Brighton at the moment, and many clubs around the world where I support them in their individual programs, if you like. So how can they support their players individually, be a bit more skillful, a bit more creative? So it's not just me on the grass with a bag of balls, but how we can affect a group of players and all the players in the academy, if you like.
Awesome. I think that's quite a rich background, but what stands out is this focus on one-to-one coaching. That is not something that's common in the football space. You hear about team coaches.
Yeah.
What is the main difference between one and the other, and why did you choose to focus on the one-to-one aspect?
You know what? Like I said, I came back from America,
right,
and I started a business, and I was doing camps and group training,
right,
and then I started doing the individual stuff. And I soon found out actually the individual stuff was one, there was not many people doing it, and I was actually quite good at it. And so, and I had quite a lot of success quickly in terms of the players I was working with got signed at academies and stuff like that. So it just made sense to me in terms of the business model, working individually with players. There was a lot less overheads, a lot less pitch hire. So that almost the business model worked for me. And then I just, now it's funny in England, we say every man and his dog is a one-to-one trainer in England. It's a saturated market. Post-COVID, it's a real saturated market. But I mean, because I've been doing it for 22 years, I'm probably one of the most well-known people in the industry. And obviously, I work with some of the best players in the world, that sort of thing. So I've managed to, create and then carve that niche and really focus on it, and now establish myself as one of the main players in that space.
I think you started your own academy. I read it's called My Personal Football Coach.
Yeah, so that's basically, so my original business is PDA Football, Player Development Academy, and then about 7-8 years ago, I started an app called My Personal Football Coach, which is...
Oh, right.
So it's an app basically originally it was for players to do technical homework activities. Very much when I worked at Tottenham, a key part of the philosophy was challenging players to do stuff away from training. It's a really important part because obviously you have, no matter how much time you get with them, it's not enough. So give them some technical stuff they can do. So the app was born out of that, really, to support players and parents and clubs to give players technical training to do away from the team setting. And then it grew into many things. And now it's like as a coach resource, there's coach education stuff on there. We do B2B stuff with clubs. So for example, Arsenal have used it in the academy. Middlesbrough, Birmingham, Blackburn, clubs all around the world have used it as a way to support their players with an online technical training resource, basically, if that makes sense. So unfortunately now, so clubs like these clubs trust me, I suppose, because they know me. I've been in the industry to help them. It's great for me to say Arsenal have trusted me to help them support their players technically. That's a real sort of great benchmark for me. It's fantastic. So my personal football coach is the app, and supports coaches, players, clubs all around the world.
I think that's absolutely awesome. And a funny parallel though, so in the fitness field and physiotherapy as well, we have this thing we call HEPs, HEP, and they stand for Home Exercise Programs.
Right.
Because we also find that even if you spend the time with a person and you teach them one thing that they can do better, a movement, etc., without the practice, by next time they come in, it's no longer there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So being away from it, from the coaching environment, but on their own in different environments, enact that skill, accelerates growth so fast, so fast. It amplifies multiple times over. And I think that's what opens a bit more time and space for you to have more players that you can work with and have them graduate further in as far as their skill is concerned. And that's just a lovely parallel between the two fields that I find so fascinating. So how does the one-to-one training session look like compared to a typical football session? What are the clear differentiators between the two?
Well, I suppose, so its core thing is it's me and the player, it's just one player, so you break it down. So what I do, obviously it depends on the player and why they come in. But I'll give you an example. For example, I work with Premier League players. If a Premier League player comes to me, obviously then it's okay, so what position do they play? So then, we look at the player, we look at the profile of the player. So, for example, Noni Madueke, I work with him from Chelsea, a famous player.
What is his name again?
Noni Madueke, Chelsea player.
Madueke. Oh, yes, I saw the video.
Yeah, so plays at Chelsea in England. So he comes to me and say, look, so he likes to play in the 7 or the right wing. So we look at that. So my job is to break down that position into the game-changing moments. Okay, what does that look like? What's going to be his success? Obviously, for him to be a success, he's going to be judged on assists and goals. So we look at that, break it down, and then I sort of break it down into microcosmic examples of those game situations, and then we train those game situations. And so then, then the idea is that so when he goes into the game, that situation will happen, and now obviously he's had the practice and the repetition to do that. So we've got lots of examples of him scoring goals, and we've practiced that exact goal or that skill or that cross. That's my job. So that's my specialism, is my ability to, I like to say my ability to help players break the game down, prepare for the game, practice for it, and then have the transference, which is a really important part of it, to get that success in the game, basically. Sounds like a more surgical approach to the coaching of football. Yeah, listen, it's like, it's interesting because, I saw the difference between a group session and an individual session. These guys will come to me and, they play for the biggest teams in the world. And even they'll say, it's frustrating because I'm not, they're paid big money to do these things in games, these game-changing moments. I'm not really given that opportunity to practice these things because there's not enough time in the week, or the coach wants to practice the team stuff, the positional stuff, and I've been there. I know what that's like, because you've got so much to do. So this is why those guys come to me and they want to say, okay, right, and my job is to say, okay, right, let's, give you in that hour, an hour and a half or whatever it is, let's give you that real focused, intensive time, which is going to give you what you really need to one, feel confident, to practice, and then really excel in the game situations. That's awesome. Very relatable. The one question though, and I've been in this situation with a tennis coach who I've collaborated with, where he would say, listen, when I work with this particular athlete, their serve has this particular problem. And he's describing it in terms of movement. Yeah. In this particular case, it was at the line. As the athlete was serving, they were stepping over the line every single time. And so the question from our perspective was, is this a habit or is this a structural limitation that he has in his musculoskeletal system? Is there an actual lack of mobility or strength or balance that we need to quantify and then impact? So obviously we take that back into the lab, which is the gym, and we verify what is happening exactly from a musculoskeletal standpoint.
and then design the training to adjust it. It adjusts, the person comes back in, and then that element that we addressed in the gym gets plugged in into the puzzle that is the game.
Right.
In your situation, it sounds like you do that from a technical standpoint, and the puzzle that you bring that player into is not the individual game, but rather the team game to which they contribute with the skills they acquire in your sessions.
Yeah, I mean, the skill of the coach is to make your practice relatable to the game.
Right.
So the player has to see that. But it's interesting you mentioned movement. I mean, all my work is based on movement. It's movement
Right.
with the ball, and my philosophy is actually called dynamic ball mastery. That's, when I'm working, particularly with the young.
Dynamic ball mastery.
Dynamic ball, because, a lot of the, people misconceptions about what I do as well. The ball mastery is that it's not only to help develop technique, but it's also trying to develop the body for the modern game. So particularly when we work with younger players, it's about being explosive and dynamic with the ball. We work on both sides, left and right. We're trying to improve agility, balance, coordination, all around those functional movements with the ball. So we identify what are the key, movements in the 1v1 duel, which is that's the main part of the philosophy. That in terms of, in the game, with 11 players on the pitch, but I'm me against you. That's
Correct.
the thing. So we isolate that. How can I be successful in that? So we isolate the 1v1. What do those movements look like? So it's either going to be me moving forward and diagonal, moving laterally, if you like, opening my hips up, those sorts of things. I'm really hammered down on those movements, particularly with the younger players. So even with the pro players, look at, right, so, for example, might be the striker, if I'm playing with someone behind me, how are my lateral movements when I receive the ball? So I need to work on that. So we do a lot of work on those movements as well with the ball.
Right.
So really try and hone in to try and support those players and identify, right, okay, look, maybe the movement's not good enough there. How can we improve that movement? So a lot of it is movement work with the ball and looking at trying to get those functional movements to be more successful in that game situation, particularly in the 1v1.
Awesome. And I trust because you're working with Premier League players and clubs, they have teams around them. They have teams of coaches, whether they are athletic specialists or technical specialists. Have you been in a situation where you would see that there is a, let's say, physical trait that needs to be emphasized in the gym environment? And have you seen that there is a capacity within the football space to address that off the pitch? Or do you see that the most effective way forward is actually to insist on the development of these physical attributes, whether that's explosiveness or strength or speed, agility, only on the pitch?
Right. Yeah, no, listen, what I do, I say to everybody, if I'm coaching coaches, I say everything's got to be done with the ball. If you're not working with the ball, it's a waste of an opportunity. But saying that, now we work in a multidisciplinary world.
Correct.
And people, know, like someone made a great point the other day. You want to surround yourself with people who know more than you about particular parts of the game.
Right.
So I'll give you a good example. When I learned a lot when I was first at Chelsea. Had a movement specialist, which he was called actually, but he was an S&C coach, Hailu Theodoros.
Okay.
A friend of mine. He now works for England in the first team. So basically, he'd work alongside us to do he'd do 3. Movement installments in our sessions. So then you learn that, that's different because that's his specialism. So I'm critical of coaches who try and do S&C if they're not an S&C coach like yourself who's not qualified. If you're a football coach, stick to football, or stick to the opposites, all right? Use a specialist when they do that. So rather than, if you come and do a football session, I'll say you stick to S&C, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So I ask you a question, it's really important to do that. And so for example, the clients I use, they will have that, they have the physical people and they watch their loading. For example, I mentioned Noni already. Noni has a full-time physio who watches his load and manages that for him to see where he is on his loading cycle, to see how our session can go. So it's really important, particularly when you're talking about elite player development at the elite level. Of course, you've got to listen to the people who understand that, and and that's why every session starts with an activation now, and maybe it's in the gym or out. It's really bringing all these people together to make that perfect sort of environment.
Yeah, so it's a very collaborative approach, or is it? Okay, let's say the week is the training cycle, right? The microcycle.
Yeah.
And within that week, there are various training sessions with different focus points. Who decides what the athlete should put in their week?
Right.
Is it the football coach, the technical coach? Is it their physical preparation coach? Is it themselves?
Yeah.
Who decides the menu?
Well, I think in a modern environment, you have a head coach,
Right.
who's the head coach, and then he'll manage the multidisciplinary team. So it might be me, say, Saul, okay, you've got a 20-minute slot to do the individual technical stuff, but then you've got the S&C guy, you've got loading part, say, well, hang on, we've got to consider loading. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's just come out of a first team environment again, and recently said, it's difficult because from one day you might have player X who can train a certain amount of times or to a certain level, player Y who's come back from injury, that sort of thing. So everybody's on a different, loading cycle, if you like. So, you've got to manage all that, particularly in the first team environment. With the younger players, there's a lot less, focus on that.
Less demanding.
Exactly. So particularly when you get that first, players are wrapped in cotton wool rightly because they're such massive commodities. So ask your question, it'll be a team of people that work together, but okay, he'll say, right, we're game day -1, for example. Okay, think about our loading, think about our impact, that sort of thing. So using the specialism of the S&C department to understand where players are, how they can train, and that sort of thing.
So there is a head coach that acts like the coordinator of the team.
Yeah, so the head coach normally, the manager or the head coach now it's called, the first team head coach, he'll manage that, and then with the coordination of his team, the assistant coaches, the S&C department, or the physios, everybody, that's group coming together and saying, okay, where are we? When can we train? Who can train? How hard can we train? Sort of thing. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think the world is definitely moving in that direction, although. What makes it a bit challenging is a lot of these disciplines, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's physiotherapy, or the practice of exercise and fitness and movement, all of these sciences actually came about in the last 2 to 3 decades, and they're still evolving quite a lot. And they have areas of each discipline that overlaps with the other discipline. And at the end, you have the person who coordinates them all. The biggest challenge has been communication, in my view. Understanding who's doing what and why, and what is the effect of that intervention. Do you find that at that level of professionalism, communication is something that's emphasized a great deal, maybe enabled technologically or meetings, or how does that journey for the athlete actually managed? How is that managed?
Well, when you work in these environments, because obviously I've been in them, there's nothing but communication. There's a meeting, and there's another meeting, there's an email. That's what we normally do. For example, you'd have a meeting, before training, a couple of hours before training, if you like, just to establish what we're doing today. Okay, you're maybe going to go work with those sorts of players. Maybe you have group players coming back from injury, those sorts of things. So there's lots of communication going in there in terms of because it's a massive, huge, massive team. And lots of people in that. So. Yeah, and it's funny because, our insist mine is the most important, and then the S&C guys just his most important. Everyone's fighting their corner.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? It's confirmation bias, I suppose. But but there's lots of, there's nothing but you have to, because, there's so many, so marginal gains are so important, and there's so many, these athletes are so important.
Yes. After so many years doing this, I bet you have 1 or 2 stories to share of your coaching journey, whether it's with a pro-level athlete or someone who is on the rise. Is there one that comes to mind that was memorable and you would like to share?
There's a lot. There's a lot of great sort of benchmarks for me in terms of like the players. Like when I started working with Florian Balogun, so he came to me, he was at Arsenal. And he'd been on loan at Middlesbrough, an unsuccessful loan, didn't do too well. Came from me, and so we did a lot of pre-season work, and then he went to loan to France, and then within that season we did a lot. He's even coming back on the Eurostar, and in that season he finished second, one of the top scorers in the French league, and then got a big transfer to Monaco. And I thought that was really sort of interesting, because he said the same thing. I do extras after, but there's 6 or 7 people doing these shooting drills. You've got Aubameyang and Lacazette there, and he's well down the pecking order. And there's not really, in terms of his profile, wasn't really what he needed to work on. So just to show you, not massively doing groundbreaking things, but just really understanding what that player needed in terms of his position, what was his profile as well, because as a number 9, there's lots of different sorts of strikers.
Yes.
And really honing in on that and giving lots of quality repetition to do that. So, yeah, explore that. And obviously, recent success of a few other players, and stuff like that's really gratifying because you can see things, happening at the very highest level and understand that, understand you can actually change things, I've got a great presentation I do when I talk about these players I've worked with. I've showed Premier League and Champions League and stuff we've isolated and we've done in training, and then we've seen it, and it's
before and after.
And we've seen it, we've seen the thing we're working on in the Premier League and the Champions League, and that's the very highest level, and that's actually wow. If you can do that, then you can do anything. Imagine we can do with young players, those things are really they make me proud and gratifying, yeah.
I think that's one of the things that probably drives you, is the idea of seeing results happen in front of you. And for these, obviously it's so impactful to their career. And you're actually doing a wonderful thing. It's a great thing to do every day, I suppose, right?
Yeah, but same as you though, isn't it? When you're working, that's what's unique with us, because we work individually. It's different to working with a group, isn't it? Because you can actually see, when you're working with your clients, you can see the results.
Absolutely.
And that's what's great, because it's different than when you work in a group. You might see that you win a game or lose a game, but it's actually, that's raw data, isn't it? It's very basic. It's like someone individually works, he's done something better. So whether, let's say, they're fitter or he's gone and done something, a skill in the game or scored a goal, is that you worked on, that is, that's coaching at its rawest.
I want to know if this happens with you. I have one of my elite female athletes in basketball. She had a knee surgery 2 years ago after an accident in the game. And she fractured her tibia and ACL rupture. So she did the surgery for 2 years. Her recovery stalled. She trains, knee gets swollen. We started working about 3 months ago, and now she went back to the national team, and she's getting ready for the championship in summer. But the journey of being, okay, you're going to have training this week, how many times? When are you going to go? How do you feel today? How do you feel tomorrow? What do we need to do to get you ready for Saturday? What do we need to do to get you ready for Sunday? That journey, there's a lot of ups and downs. And there's quite a bit of uncertainty, right? As to what the result will be. You find yourself a big part of that journey that never gets shown anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not something that people are looking for. People are just watching the results, but they don't get to really understand what went into the results. It's far more than just do this many reps, or practice this one exercise, or do this till next Tuesday when I see you. There's so much more to it. And I'm not sure about you, but in football, I presume the one who monitors the process best and puts the time and effort to inquire how the person is actually feeling and doing and so on. Aren't those the ones who succeed also when it comes to coaching?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have to invest in everything, isn't it? Like I say, it's not just me and a player on the pitch, doing a session, or that's a big part of it. It's like one of my players has just gone abroad on loan, for example, and it wasn't the club he wanted, but he's doing well. So we talked about it, we're messaging all the time, and I watched a game, and maybe the game didn't go too well, and it's an ongoing thing. And I remember even, Balogun, when he was in France, difficult to acclimatise being in a different country. That's a thing as a young man from London, being not speaking French. So there's lots of things going on, and it's like Dave Collins was a sports psychologist who used to work with us at Chelsea. He talked about the rocky road to success, as you talked about there.
Wow.
And he said it's actually very important. You have that, you have your ups and downs, and because then it helps you respond to adversity. Whereas some players who go like this all the time, then suddenly they have one little problem when they get to pros, they can't recover. So you almost have to. It's almost you not encourage adversity, but you have to embrace it and say, okay, what we learned from that situation. So many players as well, have. I've coached players who've been relegated and stuff like that. It's difficult. That's part of the game. Like you said, injury, players getting injured and being out of the game. So but that's, like I say, mentally you've just got to accept that, respond to it, and get on with it.
Push on.
Yeah.
Right. In closing, what impact are you looking to make with your specific skill set and practice in the world of football?
There's an famous English saying called "the proof's in the pudding." Have you heard of
The
it?
proof is in the pudding. Yes.
So you might have heard about that. But basically means, like I say to any player I work with, whether it's a young player or it's a pro player, you have to see results. You
Yes.
know, I'm not, you have to see the fruits of your labour and the fruits of our labour. If you're not, there's no point in doing it. So it's just the buy-in, but I'm saying that not even the buy-in. When you get to that game, you have to have seen it. So everyone working with a 12 when I'm under 12, under 11 here, under 12 when I'm working here, when I'm working a Premier League player, whatever, we've got to see the difference. That's me. So I've got to have an effect. If I'm not having an effect, there's no point in doing it. I say to everybody, this is not working. We're wasting all our time here. There's resources, time, and management, whatever. So I want to help players change. I want to change players, and we see that. And like I said, seeing players do things in the Premier League and the Champions League, we can do it. That means we can do it there. You can do it anywhere.
You can do it anywhere.
Exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
I've been in touch with the sports scientist at Atletico Madrid recently,
Okay,
and we've
nice.
had an interesting conversation 2 days ago. And what he said is that, look, being in the Champions League is there's no joke. Getting there and the stakes of playing those games are extremely high. Higher than people watching Champions League will ever understand. What it means to the players, what it means to the clubs, to the whole football industry, if I were to call it that, or to the whole football game, I think is a better word. And I want to thank you for today. I want to thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation. And I look forward to our next one.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.